Okay, so you're here with us on the deep dive because, let's be honest, you want to get smarter.
Smarter, faster.
Exactly. You want to cut to the chase, and we get that. So that's what we're all about. Today we're digging into a book that's pretty much a cornerstone in the world of entrepreneurship and leadership. Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
And this isn't just some fluffy, feel-good business book, you know? It's like a collection of battle scars and hard-won lessons from someone who's actually been there in the trenches, both winning and failing as a CEO.
Right, someone who's been through it all.
Yeah, exactly. And our goal today isn't to just regurgitate the whole book. We're going to pull out the really juicy bits, the stuff that really makes you think, the insights that cut through all the noise and help you understand how to deal with the tough stuff, the leadership challenges, the business problems, you know?
Yeah, because you're here for the good stuff.
Exactly, for the nuanced stuff.
Exactly. We're going deep, not skimming the surface.
Uh,
So we're going to break down some specific stories and frameworks from the book to give you some real tools, some takeaways you can actually use.
Make it stick.
Yeah, make it stick. Okay, let's kick things off with something that seems super basic, but is actually really profound, and that's the idea of telling it like it is. Horowitz talks about this moment where he realized he felt this pressure to always be super positive as a CEO and why he decided to stop doing that.
And it's interesting, right? Because you've got this image of a leader as someone who's always got to be upbeat and confident. And there's definitely a time and place for that. But Horowitz found that constantly being positive could actually do more harm than good.
Because it hides the real problems.
Exactly. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound.
Yeah.
Stops people from seeing the truth and actually dealing with it.
Which makes me think about those times when you just know something's off. You know, like when the official story just doesn't match up with what you're seeing on the ground. That pressure to keep up appearances can be so strong.
Oh, absolutely.
And the way Horowitz puts it at the end of that chapter really sticks with you. Stand up to the pressure, face your fear, and tell it like it is.
Right. It's not just some empty motivational quote. It's about having the guts to be honest, even when it's hard, even when people might not want to hear it.
Because in the long run, that's how you build trust.
Exactly. Trust and respect. It shows you're not afraid of the truth and that you're willing to tackle the tough stuff head on. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about a topic that's always super sensitive: layoffs. Horowitz shares this observation from Doug Leone about how Opsware was able to recover from multiple rounds of layoffs. What stood out to you about that?
It was pretty surprising, right? Leone, who's a seasoned venture capitalist, was shocked that Opsware not only survived, but actually thrived after 3 separate rounds of layoffs. Because usually when companies do that multiple times, it just wrecks the culture.
Yeah, it's like death by 1,000 cuts.
Exactly. But Horowitz says that Opsware was able to bounce back because of how they handled the layoffs. The message wasn't, you messed up, you're out. It was more like, the company messed up, and to keep going, we have to let some great people go.
And that's huge because it shifts the blame. It takes the pressure off individuals and acknowledges that everyone's in this together. It's about shared responsibility.
It's like saying we're all in the same boat.
Exactly. And that's so important for rebuilding trust after something as painful as layoffs. It lets people grieve the loss and then refocus on the future without feeling like they're constantly walking on eggshells.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to another really challenging leadership issue, firing executives. Horowitz has this interesting way of looking at it. He says it's not just about individual incompetence. It's more like a system failure in the interview and integration process.
It's like taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture.
Right.
Instead of just saying, this person wasn't good enough, he's pushing leaders to dig deeper and figure out why the wrong person was hired in the first place. Was the job description a mess? Did the interviews suck? Was there no onboarding?
Were they set up to fail, basically?
Exactly. And by figuring out what went wrong, companies can actually learn from their mistakes and do better next time.
And there's this great piece of advice that Bill Campbell gave Horowitz during one of these tough situations. He said, Ben, you can't let him keep his job, but you can absolutely let him keep his respect.
Which is such a human thing to remember.
It is. It's about recognizing that even when someone's not performing well, they still deserve to be treated with dignity.
It's about separating the person from the role.
Exactly. And that sets a really important tone for the whole company. It shows that you value people even in tough times. Okay, so speaking of tough decisions, Horowitz also talked about the complexities of having to demote a loyal friend. And that just feels so messy.
Because it's personal.
Exactly. You've got your personal relationship and your professional responsibilities all tangled up. And it highlights this tension that happens as companies grow. Sometimes the people who were amazing in the early days just aren't the right fit anymore as the company gets bigger and needs change.
It is. It takes a lot of honesty and a willingness to have those hard conversations. But ultimately, you have to prioritize what's best for the company while still trying to be fair and respectful to your friend.
It's finding that balance.
Yeah.
Okay, so switching gears a bit, let's talk about this concept from Andy Grove. The lies losers tell themselves. This is something that I think everyone can relate to, especially if you're in a leadership position and you're trying to anticipate future challenges.
Oh, for sure. And Grove's point is that it's human nature to focus on the good stuff and ignore the warning signs. You know, like when you have a gut feeling that something's wrong, but you just brush it off because you don't want to deal with it.
Because it's easier to ignore it.
Right. It's
Yeah.
easier and it's more comfortable.
Yeah.
But that kind of thinking can be really dangerous, especially for leaders, because if you're not paying attention to the red flags, you can miss a major crisis. It's like driving with your eyes closed.
And no one wants to do that.
Hmm.
Okay, so next up, the idea of lead bullets versus silver bullets. This is such a great analogy.
Yeah.
It's basically saying there's no easy fix for the really hard problems.
Right. There's no magic wand. You're not going to find some quick and painless solution. You got to be willing to roll up your sleeves and put in the hard work.
And sometimes that means making tough choices.
Absolutely.
Oh.
And Horowitz uses some great examples like Netscape's fight against Microsoft and Opsware going up against Blade Logic. These were battles that couldn't be won with a single brilliant move. It took persistence, focus, and a lot of grinding.
It's like a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. It's about staying focused on the fundamentals and not getting distracted by shiny objects or quick fixes. Now let's get a little bit real and talk about this phrase, nobody cares. What do you think Horowitz is trying to get at here, especially with what he went through at LoudCloud?
It was a tough time, right? The dot-com bubble had burst. Everything was imploding. But Horowitz realized that even though the world might sympathize with you a little bit, they're not going to cut you any slack. You still got to deliver.
The world doesn't stop for your problems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he uses the example of hiring Mark Craney, which was a really controversial move at the time. Everyone was like, are you sure about this? But Horowitz went with his gut, and it turned out to be a great decision.
And that's the key takeaway here. It's about focusing on what you can control, even when everything around you is going crazy. You can't control the market, you can't control the economy, but you can control your own actions and your own team.
It's about taking ownership.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to something a little more upbeat, but equally important, building a good place to work. Horowitz makes this really simple distinction between good organizations and bad ones. What is it?
It boils down to trust. In a good organization, people can focus on their work and know that if they do a good job, good things will happen for both the company and for them personally. But in a bad organization, there's no trust. There's a lot of politics and backstabbing, and people end up wasting a ton of energy just trying to protect themselves.
That's toxic.
Exactly. And it kills productivity. So creating that environment of trust is crucial. And a big part of that is training this S. Horowitz is a big believer in this. He says it's the boss's job. Why do you think he emphasizes that so much?
Well, for one thing, it sets clear expectations. When you train people properly, they know exactly what they're supposed to be doing and what success looks like.
It takes away the guesswork.
Right. And it also lays the foundation for good performance management. You can't really evaluate someone fairly if you haven't given them the tools and knowledge to succeed.
Makes sense.
And training goes beyond just individual skills, too. It helps spread knowledge throughout the company. It boosts morale because people feel like you're investing in them. And it can even help you identify areas where your processes need to be improved. Horowitz talks about two main types of training. Functional training, which is about specific job skills, and management training, which is about, training people to be good leaders.
Which a lot of people skip over.
Yeah, they do. But he's adamant that you can't be too busy to train. He compares it to being too hungry to eat. It's just shooting yourself in the foot.
Because you're sacrificing the long term for the short term.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive into some specifics here. Horowitz has this really clear comparison between a good product manager and a bad product manager. What are some of the key differences?
Well, good product managers are laser focused on the what, like what is the product, what problem does it solve, and how are we going to get it to market successfully. Bad product managers get stuck in the how. They micromanage every little detail and lose sight of the bigger picture.
They get lost in the weeds.
Exactly. Good product managers are also amazing communicators. They can explain complex ideas in a clear and concise way, and they create resources that everyone can use, like FAQs and white papers. Bad product managers are terrible communicators. They're constantly putting out fires, and they're more worried about what the competition is doing than about their own customers.
It's the difference between being proactive and reactive.
Right. Good product managers are always thinking ahead, trying to anticipate problems before they happen. Bad product managers are always playing catch up.
So it's really about strategic thinking versus tactical thinking.
Exactly. Okay, let's talk about hiring. Horowitz raises this interesting question. Is it okay to hire people from your friend's company? What do you think?
Well, it's a tricky one, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, it makes sense to hire people you already know and trust. But on the other hand, it can really damage your friendship.
Yeah, and it can create this perception of betrayal among your friend's employees, like you're raiding their talent pool.
Which can really hurt morale.
Absolutely. So it's a judgment call. You have to weigh the pros and cons and really think about the potential consequences.
It's about being ethical and respectful.
Yeah.
What about bringing in executives from big companies into a startup environment? What are some of the challenges there?
Well, the biggest one is probably the difference in pace. Big companies tend to move slowly and methodically. Startups are all about speed and agility.
It's a whole different rhythm.
Exactly, and executives who are used to the corporate world might not be able to keep up. And the skill set is different too. In a big company, you're managing people and processes. In a startup, you're building things from scratch. You're hustling. You're wearing multiple hats.
So you need someone who's adaptable and resourceful.
Exactly. Okay, let's talk about the pitfalls of managing by numbers alone. This is something that a lot of companies struggle with.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the metrics.
It is. But Horowitz makes this great point that managing strictly by numbers is like painting by numbers. It's for amateurs. It misses all the nuance and the art of leadership.
It's like trying to measure creativity with a ruler.
Right. And he tells the story about how he tried to flatten the hockey stick at Opsware, which basically means he wanted to make the quarterly sales growth more predictable. But it backfired because it ended up stifling the overall revenue.
So it's about finding that balance between data and intuition.
Exactly. Data is important, but it's not the whole story. You need to use your judgment and your experience to make the best decisions for the company. Which brings us to this idea of management debt.
Which is a really interesting concept.
It is. It's basically the management equivalent of technical debt. Like when you take shortcuts in your code and then you have to pay for it later.
So what are some examples of management debt?
Well, it could be things like not giving people feedback, avoiding difficult conversations, having a messy organizational structure, basically anything that you're not dealing with now that's going to come back and bite you later.
And it can really add up.
It can. Horowitz says that the silent tax of not giving feedback leads to systematically crappy company performance.
Wow, that's harsh. But true.
It is. It's like neglecting your car and then wondering why it breaks down.
Okay, so let's talk about quality assurance and management. Horowitz has this interesting idea about using HR as a kind of quality control for management.
It's a different way of looking at it. It is. Instead of just being the people who handle paperwork and benefits, he's saying that HR can actually play a really important role in making sure that management is doing a good job.
So how would that work?
Well, he suggests using the employee life cycle as a framework. So from the moment someone is hired to the moment they leave, HR can be tracking how well management is doing at each stage. Are they hiring the right people? Are they onboarding them effectively? Are they giving them the support they need to succeed? Are they getting regular feedback? Are they being developed and promoted?
It's like a continuous feedback loop.
Exactly. Okay, now let's get into the head of a CEO. Horowitz is really open about the intense psychological pressure that comes with the job.
He doesn't sugarcoat it at all.
No, he doesn't.
No.
He talks about this feeling of being in the struggle where nothing is easy and everything feels like an uphill battle.
It's like being in a constant state of crisis.
Right. And he says that the line between fear and courage is actually really blurry. They both feel the same physically. The difference is what you do with it.
So it's about choosing to act even when you're scared.
Exactly. And he has this great framework for thinking about leadership in different situations. He calls it peacetime CEO versus wartime CEO.
So what's the difference?
Well, the peacetime CEO is focused on building and refining processes, setting long-term goals, and nurturing a strong culture. The wartime CEO is all about survival. They're making tough decisions, they're breaking rules if they have to, and they're letting the situation dictate the culture.
So it's about adapting your leadership style to the context.
Exactly. You can't be a peacetime CEO in a war, and you can't be a wartime CEO in peacetime. Okay, let's talk about giving feedback. Horowitz is not a fan of the shit sandwich.
The what?
The shit sandwich. You know, where you give someone a compliment, and you tell them what they're doing wrong, and then you end with another compliment.
Oh yeah, I hate that.
It's so fake.
It is. So what does he suggest instead?
He says, be direct.
Yeah.
Be specific. Be timely. Make it a dialogue, not a monologue. And focus on behavior, not personality.
So be real with people.
Exactly. Okay, now for CEO, knowing what to do is obviously crucial. Horowitz breaks this down into two main things.
What are they?
Strategy and decision-making strategy is basically the story of the company. Why does it exist? What makes it unique? What's its path to success?
And decision-making is about making good choices quickly.
Right, even when you don't have all the information. And he says that decision-making requires intelligence, logic, and courage.
Courage is so important.
It is. Okay, so knowing what to do is one thing, but getting everyone else to do it is another. Horowitz has two key elements for this.
Let's hear them.
Leadership and accountability. Leadership is about communicating the vision, inspiring people, and setting the direction for the company. Accountability is about making sure people are doing what they're supposed to be doing and holding them responsible for the results.
It's about setting expectations and then following through.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so for a slightly weird but potentially effective management technique, Horowitz talks about the Freaky Friday approach. What is that?
It sounds interesting.
It is. It's basically when you have two teams that are constantly butting heads. So what you do is you swap their leaders. You have the leader of Team A go lead Team B and vice versa.
Oh, well.
Yeah. It's a radical idea, but it can be really effective because it forces people to walk in each other's shoes and see things from a different perspective.
It breaks down the silos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, as companies grow, they often have to make tough decisions about long-term executives, people who have been loyal and valuable, but who might not be the right fit for the future.
It's a tough spot to be in.
It is, and Horowitz stresses the importance of being transparent with these executives. Even if it's a hard conversation to have, it's better to be upfront and honest with them about the fact that their roles might change in the future.
It's about managing expectations.
Exactly. Okay, so Horowitz also talks about how Opsware had to completely rethink their strategy at one point. What happened?
Well, they started out focusing on data center automation,
Yeah.
which was a pretty niche market.
Right.
But then they realized that the market was shifting.
Yeah.
And that their niche was being absorbed into this much bigger category called systems and network management.
So they had to adapt?
They did. They had to change their whole messaging and their product offerings to stay competitive.
Which is a great example of how companies need to be flexible and willing to change course when the market demands it.
It's about staying ahead of the curve.
Okay.
So Horowitz tells this story about how an investor told him he was a fake CEO. That must have been rough.
Yeah, it was a pretty blunt assessment, but the investor had a point. He was basically saying that Horowitz didn't have the experience or the skills to lead a company at that scale.
It was a wake-up call.
It made Horowitz realize that he needed to either step up or step aside, and that realization ultimately led to the creation of Andreessen Horowitz.
So what was their vision for the firm?
Well, they saw that a lot of really talented technical founders were struggling to build successful companies. Not because they weren't smart or capable, but because they didn't have the right support.
They needed guidance.
They did. And Andreessen Horowitz wanted to be more than just a VC firm that wrote checks. They wanted to be a true partner to their portfolio companies, providing them with access to a network of experts and resources.
And they modeled themselves after a pretty unusual source, right?
Yeah, they were inspired by Michael Ovitz and Creative Artists Agency.
The talent agency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They saw how CAA had built this incredible network of talent and expertise, and they wanted to create something similar for the tech world.
So they built this in-house team of specialists who could help their portfolio companies with everything from hiring to marketing to fundraising.
It was a really innovative approach.
It was. And they also did something that was pretty unconventional for a VC firm. They embraced publicity.
They did. They wanted to be a brand that people recognized and respected. They wanted to be thought leaders in the tech world.
Which is a really smart strategy. Okay, so finally, Horowitz talks about how his role changed when he went from being a CEO to being an investor.
And the biggest change for him was that he felt free to be more open about his own weaknesses and failures.
That makes sense.
As a CEO, you have to project this image of confidence and control. But as an investor, he could be more vulnerable. He could share his mistakes and what he had learned from them.
It's like he could finally exhale.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into the hard thing about hard things, what are some of the key takeaways that really stick with you?
Well, first of all, I think honesty is paramount. You have to be honest with yourself, with your team, with your investors, even when it's hard.
Honesty builds trust.
It does. And you also have to be willing to confront the tough problems head on. Don't look for easy solutions. Don't hope for a miracle. Be prepared to put in the hard work.
The lead bullets.
Exactly. And never stop learning. Never stop adapting. The world is constantly changing, and you have to be able to change with it. And finally, remember that leadership is about more than just giving orders. It's about inspiring people, motivating them, and holding them accountable.
It's about creating a vision and then getting everyone to buy into it.
Exactly. So for you, our listener, we hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights into what it takes to build and lead a successful company.
Or any organization, really.
That's true. These are lessons that can be applied to any area of life where you're trying to achieve something difficult.
And to that end, here's a final thought for you to consider. Think about a time when you faced a really tough problem. Maybe you were tempted to take the easy way out, or to just ignore it altogether. What would have happened if you had taken the lead bullet approach? What if you had faced the problem head-on with honesty and courage?
That's a great question. Something to think about.
It is.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you later.